is that we have some decisions made around October. So there will be time for some discussion tonight and then additional discussion at future meetings as well. And we hope to begin the bus camera and Wi-Fi upgrade presentation. That is an item that will appear on the action agenda next week. So we want to make sure that we allocate adequate time for that presentation and any questions that may come up. And although we have 2 additional items to that, they're mostly information, letting you know those 2 items are going to appear on the board agenda next week. So we will get started with the feasibility study phasing. All right, Jeff, thank you.
Hello, everybody. So we'll move quickly since we've got a deadline to our 7:30 time frame. So we're going to jump right into the agenda. And while I have a lot of supporting information this evening, a lot of that's what you've seen in the past, as Dr. Rushi mentioned. What we're going to really discuss that's a little bit new this evening is we've had a lot of discussion about potentially how we would phase in these projects, both design and construction time period, so that we wouldn't be going into all the projects at once and really spreading them out over a couple-year period. Then we also will have just some reference information related to the elementary school projects for budget, the middle school cafeteria expansion, and then just a general phasing discussion. So jumping right into the overall schedule, what we were looking at is across the board for the 3 elementary schools that we've been discussing, and then also the middle school, so specifically Chatham, Coopertown, and Chestnut Wold. But the discussion really, and we've had it also with you, is that probably it looks like enrollment has stabilized in the district. So for that reason, we're moving Chestnut Wold a little bit further back from the other 2 buildings and focusing more on Chatham and Coopertown elementary schools. Moving beyond that, we're really going to start with Chatham first, is what you see up on the screen, as well as the middle school cafeteria. So as Dr. Rushi mentioned, we're sort of in this time period, July, August time period right now, with a potential board direction coming in the October time period. And with that, then we would move into about a 6-month design period that you see up on the screen, and what you're seeing is an orange across the line for 6 months, and then there's 3 sort of dark orange that represents schematic design development, and then construction documents. And as we would complete each of these phases, then the following month it would come to the board for review of that phase before we would be authorized to move into the next subsequent phase, ultimately leading to a design period, or a bidding period in the March-April time period next spring, and then a construction of 17 months for Chatham Park Elementary School. And the darker blue that you see in that line going across for the 17 months represents the 2 summer time periods. What we're trying to do is bid the projects early enough that contractors can order materials and really maximize those 2 summers, which you've seen in some of your other projects, and then minimize work during the school year, maybe more to additions or select locations of the building. And then as I believe you're dealing with some of your other projects right now, you always have a contract closeout, which we would see in roughly the summer of 2025 for Chatham Park. And I'm going to go through sort of all of these sort of quickly, and then we can come back to them, more just giving the overview. The middle school cafeteria we also see being on the same time frame as Chatham Park Elementary School, so that's sort of 6-month design period, but it's not as large of a project as Chatham, so the actual construction period would be brought down to a 12-month period, and there was even discussion that we might be able to tighten that up a little bit more, but we're trying to be conservative right off the bat. Some of that has to deal with just availability of materials, which we're seeing industry-wide right now throughout construction market. Next, Coopertown. I would note that the design period that we're showing for Chatham Park in the middle school, 6 months, that is a very, I would use the word aggressive. We just need to be very efficient with that. Now, we're not adding a lot of additions, which allows us to have that 6-month design period for both the middle school and Chatham Park. But when we get down to Coopertown, what we're looking at is, could we have a little bit more time? Typically, you try to have a 10-month to 12-month design period for design of a project if it can be made available. So that's what we're looking at for Coopertown, that you would not authorize all the projects to start this fall, but that Coopertown would move forward into construction really after the new year in 2024, and then we would have a 10-month design period, and then we could bid the project in the fall of 2024, and then what that does is gives us both a 19-month construction time period for Coopertown, but also gives us the ability to award the project earlier, so that we have more time to be ordering material, the contractors to be ordering materials to really take advantage of the summer of 2025. It may be a bit challenging for the first two projects. The summer of 2024, we're looking at 2 to 3 months for the contractors to get materials. And we did that partly as we designed the schedule because we don't want to lose an entire year. We want to try to be efficient, but it is creating an aggressive schedule. So with Coopertown, we have a little bit more time to plan things out, so that ultimately Coopertown would finish an entire year after the Chatham Park and middle school projects. And some of that discussion was not only the design period, the construction, but also for the school district with facilities, that they're not trying to bring multiple buildings online at the same time. Chatham Park really would be one large project. The middle school cafeteria is more of a more modest project, not really affecting an entire building, obviously. So those two could be in construction at the same time period, but spreading Coopertown out an entire year to give your staff more time, so that they're not trying to bring two large projects on board at the same time. Then the last item that you're seeing grouping at the bottom of that slide is Chestnut Wold. What we've said is scope to be confirmed in 2025. We don't want to lose track of that project, was the discussion we had with administration. But again, that project is potentially really contingent on what's happening in enrollment throughout the district. So what we would be looking at then, just like Chatham and Coopertown, then spreading it another year till we get to Chestnut Wold. So really we're sort of pushing that out 2 years, which then allows the district to see what's occurring with enrollment and then make a final decision of either doing the project, not doing the project, or maybe a scaled back version, depending on where enrollment is. So again, we would do about a 10-month design period for Chestnut Wold, and then the bidding and construction time period would be, we would set that and talk about that more 2 years from now, 2025. Okay. These are some slides from previous, more just for reference purposes this evening, but again, the elementary schools, we went through sort of both a detailed line item breakdown. We were also looking at cost per square foot that allowed us to create these ranges of $15 to $60 million, roughly, for the Chatham Park, Coopertown, and Chestnut Wold projects. This is a new slide that hasn't been shown previously, but I think what we wanted to talk about was we had done some additional follow-up walkthroughs of the buildings with Ken Matthews and his team through the buildings. And we wanted to mention that during the feasibility study, we were trying to be aggressive, really looking more at additions and isolated renovations in the building. So for instance, if you look at Chatham Park, the building's 65,000 square feet. We were looking at limited renovation in 36,000 square feet of the building, and 22,000, we weren't looking at any renovation. So really focusing the dollars for the district. I mentioned that this evening just because there was some discussions about adding scope to the projects, or working cafeterias, things of that nature. Again, we set the general budget at the feasibility study level for the project, but then we will subsequently, with the board's approval, drill down more detailed into the projects. Scope might change or stay exactly where it is. That'll be a decision for the administration, you as the board, or we may add scope, and we may have some discussion one way or the other. So we just wanted to have that, mention that to you this evening. Okay. Another component was, we originally were talking about a phase 1 and phase 2 to the middle school, and phase 1 was going to be about $6.5 to $7 million. And I believe just for financing purposes and planning, the district was talking about a $6.5 to $7 million tied into the 2 elementary schools. But I do want to mention that we've sort of scaled back the middle school component at this time, really to be more just focused on that expansion just of the actual cafeteria itself. Originally, we were looking at some other expansion in that vicinity of the building. So what that does is really pull it back from $6.5 to $7 million more down to $2.5 to a $3 million project, and we would flush that out with the district, with the potential approval of the district. And I would even mention the one image that you see on the upper right, that was provided by Ken Matthews, and that was from a survey that we actually did going out, specifically how we would expand the cafeteria to address concerns within the district.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So can you say more about, if we're going to do this project, I wouldn't want in a few years to have to come back and do more. So can you just say more about why we would be scaling it back?
So originally we had sat down with administration, not only at the district level, but at the building level for each building as we looked at it in the feasibility study. There had been some requests for some classroom additions, as well as some expansion of some of the physical education in the building in that general vicinity, and that tied to the overall $6.5 to $7 million. The discussion that we've been having in the last month or two was really more to focus on that cafeteria, which is really the larger concern. There's a real issue of the number of students in that cafeteria. Yeah. But that's a good point. The project that we've sort of more focused now is dealing with that cafeteria, but maybe we do have that discussion in the next month or two as we sit down, and do we scale it just to focus on the cafeteria, that $2.5, $3 million, or do we do the $6.5 to $7 million worth of work? And that'll be some of the discussion. So that, and good point. If you're going to do a project, do you address some other concerns in the building all at once? So we'll have that discussion. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Definitely. And then this was just an excerpt from the feasibility study. Again, we had been sort of looking at a phase 1, more related around the cafeteria. Long term, and this is much further out, you were looking at, eventually there will be an electrical, HVAC, and roof renovations that have to occur at the middle school. But that's not any time in the near, say the next five-year time period. Okay. And then just, these are more reference slides for some of what we were looking related to the buildings. But Chatham Park, which has really moved to the front, I think part of that has dealt with some of the things that you're dealing with enrollment at the building right now, why it's moved ahead of Coopertown. But a lot of the discussion was that for phasing, really we could focus on the addition right off the bat for the contractors, which will then create some room within the building to do the renovations, and then we would work that through. We don't have real detailed phasing plans right now because really we haven't been authorized to move forward on anything. But what I would note is we would not be developing phasing plans right at the end of design and start of construction. Typically, we're dealing with phasing both with the administration, with the building administration, and developing that over a 6-month time period, so that everybody knows what the plan is. How are we moving students around? How are we separating contractors so that we don't affect the quality of the education during construction? Okay.
Just so I'm clear on what the Chatham Park renovations are. So these are mainly just replacing the modulars with classrooms, right? And then obviously the renovation here looks like it does a little bit more than that, but that's the main purpose of this one?
Correct. If you see up on the screen, this is just highlights some of the new construction. It's developing a two-story classroom addition to remove the modulars, but then it's also developing the ability that we could create some open collaborative areas within the grade pods. A little bit more room to spread out, as well as accommodate storage, as well as correct some of the support program. For instance, you've got some support educational space occurring really in more storage locations, storage closets, things of that. The building's really maximized over the years.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. And then again, Coopertown, we were looking at how we could add additions onto that building, again, separating, creating a distinct K1 wing, 2-3, and then 4-5 grouping throughout the building, so trying to scale the building down for everybody. And again, building the additions right off the bat, that then allows the flexibility to accommodate some of the other construction while students are in the building. And with that, we have some building program analysis, more of just some references of how the buildings are being utilized right now, and any other questions that board members would have. Or if not, we can move into the financing component of the project.
Well, and while board members are thinking, Jeff, I'll just remind everyone, we have a finance and facilities meeting scheduled September 14th is the next meeting. So it would also be helpful if you don't have a question now, or you think of a question after. What we will be doing is asking the board to send those questions, and those questions will form the agenda for the September meeting. So what are the questions that you have about the timing that's proposed here?
Yeah, one thing I did want to just highlight or appreciate is that, we got the feasibility study that laid out some kind of preliminary ideas, and I recognize that we're not just moving forward with that, right? There is this time for understanding the thought process, the prioritization, the programmatic impacts, getting input, and so the decisions are still ahead of us to be looking at. So thanks for the overview. I think it was a good update from the facility study, and then showing some of the thinking around current and more pressing needs.
So let's talk about how you're going to pay
Yeah.
for it.
So Melissa Hughes is here from PFM, and because we know financing is an integral part of any of the decisions that we make for construction, she's going to share some models with us.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Am I able to share my presentation? Is that up there? Or I brought physical copies too, if we'd rather do that. I don't know.
Put it up there, it's fine.
Okay. So let's start by generally going over the interest rate environment while we wait for that to happen. So as you may be hearing in the news, the Federal Reserve has raised short-term interest rates 11 times over the course of its recent meetings. And you might be hearing that and thinking, oh my goodness, it's a terrible time to be having to borrow money. Well, that's not the whole picture. Short-term interest rates are up, but long-term interest rates, so the rates that you'll borrow at, still remain kind of just below historic averages. So what that means is it's a great time for your investments, and it's a okay time to borrow too. So you get kind of the benefit of both. That means that your fund balance should be earning some interest and doing some work for you. And also any money that you borrow and the money that goes in your construction fund before you totally spend it out to pay bills on your projects, that will have some interest earnings too that then can be used for the project and reduce the amount of debt that we all ultimately borrow. Double good thing. When we started on the last financing plan, if you all remember, we, for the last 5 years, have had a financing plan that we've worked through starting in 2018, each of the last years, for the last round of projects. So that financing plan is closed out, and we're opening up a new or developing a new plan with you. And this is the first pass of something that will continue to evolve as you all make decisions, and you get bids in, and you bring us the information and say, this project is actually 14.5 million, not 16.1. So it will consider this a living document. So right now, the district has a variety of existing bond issues, and your debt service on a local effort basis, so after state aid, is approximately 12.8 million until it drops off, and the current final payment occurs in 2038. I'm just gonna see. Nope. Okay.
We have it on our.
You have it on your screen.
Yep.
Great.
Can you tell us what page to be on, we can. do
I'm
it.
on page number 3. I can do it without it, but it makes it so much harder. So I'm on page 3, and I'm looking at column number 30 here. What we want to do is we want to focus on that column 30 because that's our starting place. And as we go on to the next page and look at scenarios, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how does that impact your borrowing plan. So if you go on to page 4, what we're going to show you are 2 different scenarios. One for a $30 million total project in 2 steps, and one for a $40 million project, which would be issued in 3 steps. And the timing of those 2 versus 3 steps, that should coordinate with the project timing that you just heard about. So 24, 25, or 24, 25, 26. Should be getting you the money at the right time in the right amounts. So whenever the district goes to borrow money, you can't just go out and borrow money just because rates are good, right? Otherwise, we would have borrowed every dollar you ever wanted in 2020. The IRS asks the district to consider 3 tests when you're considering borrowing money. They're called reasonable expectations test. First, you must reasonably expect to spend 85% of your borrowed proceeds within 3 years of settlement. Second, you must reasonably expect to enter into a substantial binding obligation to spend 5% within 6 months of settlement. Now that's not, you don't have to spend it, you have to have a contract, right? So architect's contract usually satisfies that, but it sounds like you could be in a position to be awarding bids, potentially. In which case, you'd be totally fine. And then last, they just ask you to proceed with due diligence to move forward with the project. That's not to say things don't happen and projects get delayed. COVID delayed a lot of projects, but it's that you're continuing to move forward with things. You're not just putting money in an account and letting it sit there, okay? And these tests are even more important than ever because, as I talked about earlier, those short-term investment rates, they're higher than the long-term borrowing rates. And the term for that, what that's called, is called arbitrage, positive arbitrage. So the IRS sets out rules about in what scenarios can you keep those interest earnings and in what scenarios can you not keep those interest earnings. And so there's different tests that you can meet, spending tests, spending your money quickly. And then there's a test about small issuer exemption. Just like we have often talked about bank qualified, where you issue $10 million or less and they give you special treatments. You get some special treatments here too, but it's for $15 million or less. So a little bit of a different test. So when you look at the next page, you're gonna notice some $10 million amounts and some $15 million amounts. That's strategic because we're being thoughtful about both of those kind of special classifications. And then finally, just a reminder about a reimbursement resolution. If you start to spend money beyond just design costs in advance of a borrowing, we can put a reimbursement resolution in place that lets you reimburse yourself back 60 days from the date of adoption. So if you want to get going, we issue the bonds a little bit later, then you would be good from an IRS perspective to reimburse yourself. So let's look at some numbers on page 5. This is scenario 1. This looks at what if you did $30 million in 2 steps in March of each year, March 2024 and March 2025. And you can see in column 5 what that would look like. That's for step 1. So an incremental local effort of about $700,000 a year. This would be over 20 years. And then we'd come back in March of the next year, and that timing's not coincidental. Usually that's kind of when you need to be borrowing money to be ready to go for construction season so that they can order you parts and stuff. And then we come back in March of the next year for another 15 million, and this would be for a 19-year borrowing, so we're capping it at the same final term. You'd still have an excellent debt drop-off, being thoughtful about the fact that we know that there are more projects coming down the road, as you heard from your architect. So setting you up for success in the long term, not totally wrapping it tight. So that's what that looks like, and you can see the millage equivalent by series. Millage equivalent isn't to say that you would pay for this by raising your real estate taxes, just equating it in that terminology. Looking at page 5, this is for a slightly larger project, 40 million. Now we're spreading over 3 calendar years, and doing through much the same process, and you can see column 13, that run rate that you get up to. Instead of dropping down to 5.5 million, you'd only drop down to 7.4 million. If the district decided you wanted to proceed with the project and felt like you could meet the reasonable expectations tests and wanted to proceed with the borrowing, the timeline could look something like in January, you would authorize the finance team to proceed. In February, we do a parameters resolution, so that's the debt incurring resolution. Later in February, we would issue the bonds, so sell the bonds and lock in rates. And then in March, towards the end of March, you could get your money. We could move faster than that if you wanted to, but I'm illustrating for you roughly the amount of time it takes from when you say go to when you get the money in your accounts. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I think I have 1 minute left.
In terms of just kind of coordinating these two tracks of moving pieces, the design, and would we go through the design and then the bidding and get firm numbers in order to proceed with?
You wouldn't have to. We're almost certainly going to do a $15 million tranche as step 1.
Okay.
It's step 2 where we need to know
The right size.
the right size. Step 1, it's kind of, we know you need to have a non-bank qualified year at least 1 year. Why wouldn't we try to maximize every special thing the IRS gives you?
With the arbitrage.
Yeah, with the arbitrage. And
Nope, and that makes sense that we know that whatever seems to be on the table is more than $15 million. So the 15.
yeah,
that is strategic.
it's step 2 where we'd need to know, and then we need to think with you, is there a step 2 and a step 3? Is there a step 2, step 3, step 4? Where are you at with Chestnut Wald? You know, what kind of interest earnings have we already achieved? Honing in on some of those more details. Step one is kind of, I think, it would look the same in any scenario. It's when you get further down the line that things start to look different depending on what decisions the board makes.
And just if you could take a moment to remind us and the public about the district's success with raising funds and how we are, our
Yes.
creditworthiness is.
Yes. Well, 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago now, the district got a credit rating upgrade, which was very exciting. It always makes me very, very happy. And it's not your first credit rating upgrade. Since 2010, the district has been on a slow and steady march upward on the credit rating scale, which is a real testament to the hard work that the board has done to put good financial policies and procedures in place that have borne out healthy economics. We know the health of the community is great from, fundamental economics, but really healthy fund balance, healthy procedures, policies. And the credit rating agency has rewarded that. And in turn, the bond market rewards that. And I'm very happy to say, as of our last bond issue, the district has only fixed rate bonds.
Right, yes, got it
Yes.
from under the swap.
Yes, so
Yes.
there has been such a tremendous like de-risking of the debt portfolio. So that makes me happy.
Well, I'm glad that brought you such joy to answer that question. I was throwing you something. I didn't realize it would be so exciting, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a nerd.
I just have a brief editorial comment, which is, I've sat through quite a few of these financing discussions over the years, and I just want to say that it's always a good time to borrow. I've never heard a discussion otherwise.
Yeah, there were some bad times to borrow. Definitely. In the 70s, oh man,
That's
not a
before
good
my
time then.
Can I ask just a really basic question?
Yes.
Which I think I already know the answer for, but I just want to have it out there. Is there any benefit or any possibility, I guess more is the question, of doing a quicker payoff so that there is less overall interest?
We could do that, and we could look at it. But ultimately, it's gonna, if you only had this project to do, these projects to do, that would be what we would be showing you. Because we know that there are other things coming down the pike, what we're doing is using a strategy that lets you, to Mr. Feinberg's point, mitigate interest risk over time and spread it out over a reasonable time period where these projects will reasonably be good for 20 years. So they're being paid off over the course of their useful life. If you came back and said, we are done after this, we would come back and say, all right, let's shorten it up. Let's just be debt free. But that's not the reality of kind of where you're at from a building maintenance perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank y'all for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here tonight, Melissa. And again, I'll just, remind the board members of our September 14th meeting, and similar to when Jeff was presenting, if there are questions that you think of as you reflect on the information that you heard tonight, please send those to us and we will formulate the agenda based upon that. So our next item, upgrading the cameras on our buses, and which will then subsequently require an upgrade to the Wi-Fi that will be required for us to be able to view all that.
Nothing is easy, right? That's all.
Good evening, everyone.
Mr. DiPaolo and Mr. Anderson.
So, so we're looking at doing an upgrade to our in-school bus cameras. Rob and I have been working on a project now for quite a few months. Really started over the winter. We looked at what our current system is and how antiquated it is, about 8 to 10 years old. We were able to get a lot of our 24/7 older cameras out of our buses with our current budgets and upgrade them. And now we're really looking at from a whole perspective, our fleet of 70 buses and what it would take to upgrade that and get that on the Wi-Fi, where once our school buses connect to a Wi-Fi, we can then pull that footage as opposed to going to the school bus, pulling the SD card, not knowing if we're going to be able to see that footage. Some of the roads within the township and some of the routes that the buses take, may knock a wire loose, something like that. We go and pull the footage, and all of a sudden we don't have the footage because the wire was loose and the DVR was not connected. So we're really looking to enhance that through this whole project.
Can I ask one question
Yep.
on that? So if we had Wi-Fi, would that mean also then there would still be something that would be recorded? Like if Wi-Fi, we all have issues with Wi-Fi going out. So is there like an on-site recording that also happens at the same time?
Yeah, so it would still be, and Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, it would still be recorded on that SD card. It's just a matter of, really us being able to pull that footage right away when an administrator asks for it.
Yep, no, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So what we're looking to do, like I said, there's about 30 buses that are 8 to 10 years old, and we're looking to get 1 or 2 flush mount cameras that would meet code, would meet state approval, and have them put into the buses. One would be a front bulkhead bus that would face the back of the bus, and then, of course, one would be a mid-bulkhead that would, face the back and the front a little bit. So you get two views of not only negative behavior on a school bus, but also positive behavior, right? We don't always get calls that, there's negative incidents. We do also take some calls. Hey, how has this student been acting on the bus? We pull that footage, show the administrator, he's been acting great on the bus. So we want to use it as a tool for not only negative, but positive also. Like I said, all of our cameras right now are on an SD card that we physically have to go out to the bus and pull. And Rob and I have reached out to a lot of the school districts in the area, and that's how they have to do it. It's frustrating. There's nothing worse than reaching back out to an administrator and saying, hey, I don't have the footage on this because, I don't really know what happened. So we're hoping to get rid of that hiccup and be able to have everything recorded in a timely manner, and we can pull it right away and get that to the administrator so they can view it.
Did you say how long the recordings last? Like, how long do we keep recordings?
Generally, most of our security footage we keep for about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Routine day, yeah,
And it would be the same with the Wi-Fi, that wouldn't change, okay.
correct. So again, right now, security footage is saved locally on the SD card in the bus only. There's no way to identify errors on the units other than removing the card and checking it. With this new system and the Wi-Fi, we would be able to then get a health alert and let us know that, bus 5, the DVR may not be working. Mm-hmm. We could either take that bus out of service, get it fixed until it's up and running, and then put it back in service. And then, of course, updating the software on the units is done bus by bus. Our proposed solution, Rob's going to take over from here.
A little shorter than Kevin, sorry. So as Kevin was mentioning, what we're looking to do is try to avoid that scenario where a member of Kevin's team goes out to the bus and we don't have footage. So in speaking with Provision, who's the vendor who supplies the cameras, they have an option for us to have a server in the district that the buses would communicate when they return to the bus yard. As Kevin mentioned, it would allow us to know before the bus leaves the yard if there was an existing problem. It also would allow him to request footage, so as soon as it does return to the bus yard, that footage would get uploaded and Kevin would be able to then share it with the necessary parties. To do that, there's, as Kevin again mentioned, there's about 30 buses that have outdated recorders in them that don't have any Wi-Fi capabilities currently. Those units would need to be replaced to be able to pull them onto the same system where they could upload their footage. Again, another thing we don't have is we do not have any wireless coverage in the bus yard currently. There's a little bit of coverage in the maintenance and transportation offices, but there's none that really extends out to the garage or the yard itself. So part of the project would be putting some wireless access out there. Again, it's not like a classroom where we've got a whole bunch of stuff connecting at the same time, but we still need to create enough coverage in the area so that the buses would be able to connect back. And then the last piece would be that installation of a server to both manage the units, allow us to update software on them, as well as store the video footage and get us those health reports. Thank you. So this is a breakdown kind of what that cost would look like. Starting at the top, we have the 30 new recording units to replace the 8 to 10-year-old units that don't have Wi-Fi capabilities. At that point, all of our buses would have 2 cameras in them. A lot of those units we're replacing still only have the camera on the very front of the bus, not the one halfway back. Because it is 30 buses, in theory, this equipment's coming in probably right about the start of the school year. Would be having Provision come out and actually do the installations onto the buses so we can get them on the road with the new units as quick as possible. The licensing then for the server, Provision Connect, is their server software that would manage the pulling of video and the health reports that we were talking about. That's a 5-year license, so that would cover us for the next 5 years. And then we would reassess in 5 years what we want to do then. The wireless access points for the yard, there's a range there. We started with 5 vendors, talking to them about what their proposed solution would be to make that work. We've narrowed it down to 2, but we haven't really narrowed in on an exact price for that. So just giving you a range of kind of where we think that'll fall. Some of the existing buses, even though they have Wi-Fi capabilities, don't have external antennas connected to the unit. So If you can picture on the bus where the unit is, it's basically in a glove box inside the bus. So it's inside a metal box, inside another metal box, which isn't, particularly conducive to wireless signals. So we'd have to make sure that they have a wireless antenna that gets mounted on the windshield to allow for that upload. And then the last piece would be, and that's not for all of the buses. We have to get a count. I'm guessing maybe 10, but we wanted to include that in the total cost. And then the physical server to run the Provision Connect software, and then store the footage. And we wanted to make sure we included enough storage on there to, hopefully Kevin's not getting a ton of calls for pulling footage that's going to fill it up, but we wanted to have the availability for whatever they needed to pull and store to have that footage saved. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a timeline. So as Dr. Rishi mentioned, this is something we would hope to bring to the next full board meeting next week, so that we can get some orders placed the following day. To the best of our discussions with all of the vendors, we don't have any supply chain issues with any of the equipment that we're talking about ordering. The wireless would be the only remaining one. We haven't, again, narrowed down on models, so we'll find that out once we finish that with them. But we've given them from the get-go that we don't really want to go with a solution that we know there's going to be a long lead time on. Like, they understand that there's some urgency on our part to have this solution in place as well. So assuming that we get those orders out middle of August, hopefully September, October timeframe, we'll start to receive equipment. Kevin can work with Provision to start getting the units installed on the buses, and my team will work on getting the wireless installed in the bus yard, and the server set up. And then, again, 70 buses, a lot of configuration going on. Hopefully by, the end of November, we'll have all of the buses on the road uploading footage when they return, kind of in this proposed solution that we've given. Oh, and to answer your question, so it will still store the footage on the bus until it's requested. So even when we're talking about sending the footage online, it'll still remain on the SD card for a period of time.
Great. I did have one question with the wireless cost. What would then be like the yearly cost we would have? I assume that amount is more just to establish it.
Yeah, so we'll have to talk to them. Different vendors handle that differently. Sometimes the cost is all upfront. There's no ongoing cost after that. Others of them have a lower upfront cost, but then there's a licensing cost and a support cost year over year. So it'll depend, but it's one of those things that we'll build into the technology budget going forward if there's an ongoing cost.
And then with the licensing, would we then in 5 years have to pay about approximately that same amount again for another 5 years of licensing?
Yeah, I mean, assuming that we continue with the same solution, that their pricing hasn't changed, that there's not other options out there, it would probably be about the same.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just explain, what is the requirement for school districts to have cameras on buses? And are we currently meaning that this is an upgrade that has, I think, a lot of improvements going for it, but I don't think I know what the state says is a minimum you have to do.
So there isn't necessarily a requirement, but the district made that, decision a few years ago to put cameras into the school buses. The only requirement right now is that they're flush mount. God forbid there was ever an accident and the school bus flipped over. You don't want the dome type cameras protruding from the roof. But other than that, every new school bus that we get right now actually has 3 cameras in it, 2 for, let's say, incidents, and then 1 is front-facing dash cam. That's more for, driver safety and that sort of thing. But, other than that, we're doing a really good job with our school bus cameras.
No, then I appreciate the initiative to have
sure.
this safety, and I have to just call it that I thought it was great how you saw it not just as a disciplinary, but to
absolutely, positive behavior also.
Good behaviors too. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. And also just a quick, quick note: our 10 new school buses that were approved quite a few months ago are actually scheduled to ship from Georgia on the 15th, so next week, and we hope to have them up and running, hopefully for the first week of school, if not shortly after.
Do they all come up as a caravan of I-95?
That would be nice. Yep.
I'm sorry, I have a question here. So we have 30 buses right now, right?
70 buses total.
70 buses right now, 30 camera and recording units.
that would need, so 30 school buses have the old 700 series DVR system, and we will
Okay.
be upgrading them to the 900 DVR system.
Well, I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, and for cost-wise, so this wasn't something that was initially line item budgeted in the 23-24 budget, but the board did approve contingency reserves. So that that helps offset these capital expenditures when you have them on a one-time basis, where you don't anticipate it, but these things do come up. So you are comfortably set $800,000 in your contingency reserve. So this project being between 98 and 108,000 will, you'll have sufficient funds to cover that and move those into their appropriate line item.
Can you clarify, is that the surplus from prior years that we move into the kind of capital projects fund, or that's in our operating budget this year, the contingency, the kind of extra cushion that we put in this year's operating budget?
Yes, so that resides in your general fund. It's your extra contingent,
Okay.
your extra cushion in the event you have line items like this, or if you were to lose a major taxpayer in the district and, had to offset that loss in revenue.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
And Mr. Testa will take the next two items that are on there.
So for real estate tax assessment appeals, we did have a appeal come through that's will be up for the board for approval at the August 17th meeting. It's for folio 2209106570, and this is for a cell tower. The settlement for this will bring your assessment down from $1,528,300 to $961,090, which will result in a loss of tax revenue of $10,305 for the 2023 and then the 2024 tax years. And the stipulation is in the packet as well.
And that will be on next week's agenda.
Yes, so that'll be presented for board approval next week.
I guess appraising a cell tower is different than appraising
Yeah.
the real estate,
Right.
the more typical commercial or residential properties in the township.
Yeah, it's something it's definitely different. It's more unique than upgrades to a home and a property.
And this was initiated by the owner of the cell tower, of the,
If it's
I
going
believe
down.
so.
I
would
This
think
has
so.
gone back and forth.
so,
Yeah, I
so
don't
a
think we
cell,
did this.
so the assessment for a cell tower can go down by $600,000?
And this would also be subject to that, what is the common ratio?
Common
Common ratio,
The
adjusted
adjustment
further.
that's coming into effect as well, yeah. All right. Nothing else on that, we can get to the last item on the agenda.
So that is then just your project's update. So Ken Matthews did include a memo to the board in here just to kind of give an update of where we are with Coopertown and Chatham. I know Dr. Rushi and I will be going out, I believe it's Monday, to Coopertown to see the progress that's being made in that building as well.
Okay, yeah, the report indicates that things are on time and wrapping up and should be able to be handed over so that our staff, teachers can get into the classrooms where there was the casework, and I'm sure they're excited to turn the HVAC on.
Yes. I was over at Coopertown yesterday and I got to see, like half of the building is pretty much ready to go and they're focusing on the other half of the building, so it's
Okay.
coming along.
Great.
Just wondering what the holdup is on the NIPSES permit for Linwood. It seems that every month we hear.
EV?
Yeah, every year, I'm sorry, yeah, NIPSES, that's the county, every month we hear that they're about to sign off on the paperwork and just keeps getting kicked down the,
And that's for
And
the
pizza,
site
yes.
work, the
It's just, I mean,
stormwater retention, or,
yeah, I'm just wondering why that's being kind of held up for so long. It's,
I can reach out to Ken on that to find out the whole.
yeah, and I mean, I know, working with, the county, they have to take their time with these things, but it's been, every month I keep hearing like, oh, we have just one more thing to sign, and that one more thing seems to have been on the
think it's for
agenda
high
for the
school
past
also.
The high
5
school
months
too
now.
needs it for its final certificate
High
of
school needs it too,
occupancy.
yeah. So I mean, I'm just wondering, wondering if, is there any, there's any way to kind of give the county a nudge, say, hey, we've been in this building now for 2 years, can we get things signed? Anyway.
That concludes our agenda items, and so we do have time for public comment if there's anyone here who would like to speak. Okay. Hearing none, the business of this agenda for our Finance and Facilities Committee is adjourned, and we will have a 10-minute break before we start our next committee. Thanks.